Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about unpaid housework, and hopefully, by the end of this video, I will convince you that housework is anything but unpaid. I don't think feminist women really understand this, but there is an economic value associated with domestic housework. And by continuing to ignore this, I think they've encouraged women to pursue 9 to 5 careers that are actually costing everyone money in the long term. And the burden of your livelihood and the burden of maintaining your home, I think, is greater for single girl bosses living in big cities than it is for, married women doing, anywhere from 5 to 10 hours worth of housework per week. So let's dive in. This is an essay I wrote a little over almost a year ago, titled "Does Housework Actually Pay Women More Than Their Job?" And so I start this by kind of talking about my own experience with feminism, as I've shared in other videos. I'm, probably maybe like 2 or 3 years removed from feminism, and I used to be a girl boss who thought that my career was everything. And it's only recently that I've started to really challenge the narratives of feminism. And one of the things that really bothers me about feminism is the victimhood narrative. So it tells women that we're all victims of the patriarchy, when in fact we're not. We're victims of our own ego and our own narcissism. And I kind of did the things I was supposed to do and I was told to do by feminist matriarchs to claim my worth. And really, what I've come to the conclusion is that it just fanned the flames of my own ego, and it engulfed me in entitlement and self-righteousness, and it led me to believe I deserved something that I hadn't taken the time to earn. So a juxtaposition that I make here in this article is running. I'm a marathoner. I love running. I've been doing it for over a decade now. I'm about to run my 11th race, and it's something I absolutely love. And one of the goals I've been working towards is qualifying for the Boston Marathon. I got a qualifying time in 2024, but unfortunately, because of how competitive the field was that year, I was about a minute off from actually getting a bib in the 2025 race. So I am back to the drawing board, and I've been working through an injury as well. So that's put a wrench in my plans, but I am still working towards getting a qualifier spot at Boston. But the race I'm running this year, I actually did get a qualifying spot in it. So that's it's a pretty cool achievement nonetheless. But running to me is important. It's a good illustration for this point, because feminists have done absolutely nothing to enable me to run. Yeah, you can make the argument. What was it, in like the 60s or 70s? There was a woman that ran as a bandit in Boston, and for a while it was exclusionary to women. I totally get that, and that was a point in time in history, and we are several decades past that now. Right now, in 2025, in the year of our Lord, there is nothing stopping me from running except for myself, right? Like, no feminist has helped me run. No feminist is encouraging me to get up early in the mornings to get my runs in. Throughout my running career, I've had, different points in time where I've had to change my running schedules. There's times where I've woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Even the past couple weeks, just because it's hot here in Austin in the summers. I make sure I'm ready to start my long runs by 7 a.m. so I can get out of the heat. So, there's a lot of sacrifices that go into running. There's a lot of discipline that's required with it, and it's mentally taxing. It's not just about physical endurance. If you've run a marathon, there's a huge mental component to it as well. So I feel that if I have to ascribe to the victim narrative, and if I have to ascribe to the point that, I can only achieve success if I'm part of a collective and I'm part of this feminist narrative, then I have surrendered every individual milestone I've achieved as a runner. Like the only way for me to be part of the feminist narrative is to surrender my own individual achievements. And because running is so personal, like I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to concede to feminists that my success is because of them. Like, my success is my success. It's mine. And I don't want anyone taking that away from me. And so that means I need to own it, which means I need to own the failures as well. So that's why, for me, being a victim to the patriarchy doesn't work, because if I'm a victim, and that's a collective, then my successes are also a collective, if that makes sense. And I'm not willing to give someone credit for the discipline, the hard work that I've done and the achievements I've had. I'm not willing to give a collective group of people credit for the success that they haven't earned. So I think earning your success is important, and I think feminism deprives women of that. And so obviously I'm now kind of in this post-feminist world trying to figure out what's what. And part of this process is reconciling, professional with domestic. And this is a challenge. Like I'm not gonna lie. It's for the longest time, I've been told that my social value and my worth is tied up in a professional career. And for myriad reasons, that has come undone, partly by my own choices, but partly also by circumstances of the economy and change that are happening around us right now. Millions of people are about to lose jobs thanks to the adoption of AI and automation. So we can't continue living in a world where value is ascribed to your professional existence. I think there's something to be said about reapportioning value to the domestic realm. And when we think of domestic, it's through a feminist lens. We only think of it in terms of housework, but I think domestic is far more than that. Domestic is home, taking care of home. Yes, it's also your personal life. It's also hobbies. It's all sorts of non-professional, non-financial aspects of your life, right? So domestic isn't just doing chores. It encompasses a wide swath of activities that make you who you are. And for the longest time, women especially have surrendered our lives and our identity to the professional domain. And we've let the domestic domain kind of fall to the wayside. And so I think in a post-feminist world, I think there's going to be a need to reconcile that individually, but then also societally and culturally. And so I've been told this, and I'm sure, if you're in a post-feminist journey yourself, you've probably experienced this too. But for years, I was told that tending to housework would rob me of my dignity, while motherhood would destroy my career. Conceding to the domestic demands of my future spouse would deprive me of equitable remuneration for the time and labor I allocated in the home. And that's the lie we've all been told. It's that it's one or the other. It's a zero-sum game. If you do housework, if you become a mother, if you get married, like, you lose all sense of yourself. And what I want to challenge this narrative with is that maybe instead of being oppressed and maybe losing things, maybe women are actually coming out ahead. And maybe performing housework and chores and focusing on the domestic isn't a degradation to women, it's a way to liberate them. And so this essay argues that women might actually be better off financially if they return to the home rather than continuing to fight for an equitable wage in the workforce. And I make this case because women are, especially married women, are effectively being subsidized by their husbands. And so they are not 100% responsible for 100% of their well-being. There is a non-transactional economic value to being married and to maintaining a home. And because of that subsidy and the alleviation of financial pressure that subsidy provides, modern women actually have more freedom because they can launch a business or pursue a career that's more aligned, more flexible with their own potential and what they want to do. Something that allows them to be both a mother and have a professional, vocation as well. You can do all of these things in partnership with another person. And so I think this provides far greater compensation than anything anyone is actually making in their 9-to-5 jobs. And I'll break down some of the math in just a minute. So to give you the context for why I think this, you have to look at productivity gains over time. And we always talk about productivity gains from a economic standpoint. So we talk about it in terms of wages and labor and workers, but we also need to talk about it within the domestic realm. So since, the 1950s, there's been a 92% drop in the time spent on household chores. And a lot of this is due to the fact that there's been significant technological gains in, household appliances. We have things today that our grandmothers simply did not have or could not afford. Therefore, I am spending far less time maintaining a home of comparable size than my grandma did in the 1950s. Like, that is just how it is. And so and modern women like me today have more time than our grandmothers did. But instead of using that time to invest in hobbies, to grow ourselves, to spend it with children, or to take care of the home, we're sacrificing more than 40 hours a week of our life to go work for the man in corporate America. And we're celebrating working in a cubicle farm and being basically a wage serf to modern, corporations. We're celebrating that, and we think it's degrading to do the laundry or vacuum the floors in our own home. We think it's beneath us to take care of our home, but that it's something that should be dignified and celebrated to go take care of someone else's business, to help build their business, to help the shareholders of that business capitalize on our productivity. That's literally what's happening, and we celebrate it. Okay, so there have been, like I said, significant advances in technology, and that has changed the value proposition of tending to a home. And so, things that you could commonly attribute to chores are, cleaning and folding laundry, doing dishes, putting them away, sweeping and mopping floors, making the bed, taking out the trash and recycling. There's other stuff too, like household or like lawn or mowing the lawn, maintaining the house. Things that typically fall under the man's purview. But for women, these are kind of the big ones. And then obviously, if children, then you have to take care of children, pets, you have to take care of pets, that kind of stuff. But with these modern conveniences, this has changed the game, right? So back in the 50s, women were spending about 57 hours a week completing all of these chores. And so at the time, that was equivalent to a full-time job. And that explains why so many women stayed at home and were housewives. It's not necessarily that's what they wanted to do. Is that up until mass consumerism started in the post-war period, like there were domestic things that had to be done, and no one, like if you didn't do them, you didn't eat and you didn't have clothes. And if you work, you go back to like medieval times, like if women didn't contribute during, hard years, like you just starved, right? So there's always been a time and place for women in the economy. And it ebbs and flows with different seasons of life, and especially in agrarian cultures when, different harvests, and if you had enough to sustain yourself or not, women had to take a greater role in the economy. But up until, the 1950s, women, you needed someone to do the laundry. You needed someone to cook meals. Like there weren't those modern conveniences that we have today. And obviously things changed with mass consumerism. You saw the proliferation of consumer appliances, new tools, cleaning products, microwavable meals, fast food joints like McDonald's. So you saw a radical transformation and change in the 50s that changed how much time women had to allocate towards domestic duties. So now, fast forward to 2020s, we have all sorts of things. We have robotic vacuums. You have like smart garbage cans. You have like smart washers that can automatically do things for you. Yeah, like there's still some things you need to do. You need to move the clothes from the washer to the dryer. You need to, take the dishes out of the dishwasher once they're clean and put them away. But then there's also opportunities to outsource this. And I've done a separate video and wrote a separate essay on this. But, modern women who are making their own money and have the means to do so can outsource all of this. There's a myriad of different gig apps that you can use, and you can hire out workers. You can send out your laundry to a cleaning service. Like there is, in 2025, there is no reason why any single woman who has an income needs to do any sort of chores. It's at this point it's an option, in my opinion. But regardless, the fact still stands that we've gone from about 57 hours worth of work to about 5 hours worth of work per week, give or take. And so when you hear complaints about men and women splitting the household load, specifically with housework, I'm not talking about kids and shuttling them from practice and managing doctor's appointments and that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about chores, okay? But when you're talking about a 50-50 split, we're not talking about splitting 57 hours worth of work anymore. We're talking about splitting less than 5, which is pretty negligible. I think the average person the average person definitely spends more than 5 hours per day on their cell phone. I think the average person probably spends more than 5 hours per week watching TV mindlessly on the couch. So this is pretty negligible at this point. And so the feminist narrative focuses on the fact that employed women are unfairly shouldering more of the burden of household work than their male counterparts. And this narrative forces modern women to accept full-time employment as their default option rather than offering it as a choice. So within this narrative of battling for, shared housework in the home and having men shoulder more of the burden, the underlying assumption of that is that that has to happen because women have to work outside the home. Like full-time employment outside the home for a corporate employer is the default option, and it's the preferred option by most modern women. But what feminists don't acknowledge is that this is a choice, in part by some of what I just said, where you can outsource a lot of stuff these days, but also because because of the productivity gains that women have with reduced housework, it frees up more of their time. So yes, they can go work for a corporate employer, or they can benefit from the de facto subsidy that is provided if you're part of a married couple and you're not the only or the sole contributor to your household's economic or finances. There is a hidden subsidy that women can effectively benefit from, and they can use that to do whatever they want. And that can include running a business from your own home, which is more like optional now than it has been ever before. A decade ago, it was hard to start a Shopify store or an Etsy shop, and now anyone can do it. So I want to dive in to some of the math here. So I think by choosing to pursue a career, modern women have to shoulder the burden of the cost of living alone. So basically, if you are a girl boss woman, in your mid-20s, in your career, living your life in New York City, if you don't have a husband, you are shouldering 100% of the cost of your living alone. So your apartment, and the rent that goes with that, all of the chores you still have to do on your own, regardless. Feeding yourself, even though that's a domestic task, like you still have to feed yourself. Doing your own laundry, all that kind of stuff. So you're instead of benefiting from the freedom to capitalize on the gains that technology has afforded them, they're actually making it harder to raise their own standard of living because they're handicapped. They're handicapped by the cost of having to shoulder the burden of living alone. And so feminists make the assumption that women ought to be equal to their male counterparts, but this assumption fails to acknowledge that men and women do already contribute equitably to a household, even if their contributions aren't solely measured in financial terms. So basically, feminists have reduced the conversation to financial and economic terms, and we look at things like the gender pay gap and unpaid household labor, and everything has a dollar value attributed to it. And they don't recognize that there is an equivalent economic value, or there is an equivalent financial value that isn't transactionally exchanged, but that women still benefit from. So instead of, when women do the laundry, they take their kids to practice, all these kinds of things, they benefit because if they're married and they're in a good relationship and they're in either a dual or a single income household that has sufficient means to support themselves, they're not shouldering 100% of the burden on their own. So I want to switch over to my tablet here because I've written down some math, and the article I wrote is a little bit older, so I want to bring some additional math here. Okay, so like I said before, you've seen a drop in the labor time in the household from 57 hours per week to 5. Okay, so you're looking at about let me make sure I have a good color here. We'll do red. Okay, about 20 hours a month, give or take. And again, this is going to fluctuate depending on how big your family is, how big your home is. Managing a 1,100 square foot home is a lot easier than a 2,000 square foot home. So a lot of this is going to vary and things like that. But on average, that you can expect to spend about 20 hours per month on chores. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit here. Okay, let me get this highlighter. Okay, so if you're a single girl boss living in, say New York City or wherever, you're going to there's two primary expenses that you can't really escape from. And that has to do with housing. You're going to have to pay rent and you're going to have to pay utilities. And utilities includes things like water and electric and heat and air conditioning and internet, right? Those are two things, unless you are fully off grid or you did what I did and lived in a car for a year, you're not going to be able to escape those costs. You're going to have to pay them. So I did a quick Google search. This number obviously is going to be higher if you live in a city, but on average, the cost of rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the United States right now is $1,750, give or take. And so if you are not married, if you are single and you are doing the girl boss thing and you're on your own, you are paying 100% of that every single month out of pocket. And then on top of that, you're going to have to pay utilities. I went through my utility bill from a previous apartment I lived in. And I looked at the monthly costs of water and electric. And actually, I didn't include water in this. I stand corrected. This is actually a little bit higher. Okay, this is just for water and internet, but it was electric and internet. Sorry. So this is $150 to $190 a month, and then I would add probably about $30 to $40 a month on top of that for water. But regardless, you're gonna probably spend anywhere between $150 to $200 a month on utilities, and that's gonna vary throughout the year depending on where you live and how much the cost of utilities are. So if you're a single girl boss and you want to live alone in your apartment doing your own thing, you're going to be spending almost $2,000 every single month just on your housing costs. Okay. So that's obviously not practical for the vast majority of people. So you're probably going to have a roommate. I did a quick Google search on this as well. And obviously it's going to vary based on the type of housing you live and where you live, but you can expect to pay anywhere from $700 a month to $1,500 a month. Again, it depends. You know, if you have a larger home, say like a 3-bedroom apartment or a 5-bedroom house, it'll be significantly cheaper. When I lived in DC, in like 2017 timeframe, there were people renting rooms in shared houses for about $1,500 in top neighborhoods in the city. So that gives you an idea of where things were, and they've probably gone up substantially since then. And then again, utilities, you're probably looking at close to $100 a month, even if you split it. So if you have a roommate, you're still paying $775 to like $1,600 a month out of pocket. And then with a shared housing arrangement with someone you're not married to or romantically involved with, there's going to be a requirement to share labor or share chores. And so different groups of people do different things. You might have a chore chart. I've, lived in shared housing in the past where we just all pitched in and got, housekeeping, once or twice a month. So it'll vary, but that's going to add a cost. And again, you're going to have to shoulder the burden of doing the housework to be a good roommate, or you're going to have to pony up and pay for someone else to come in and do that for you. Okay, now let's look at married women. I've broken this down into 3 different categories. One where the husband pays 100% and the woman pays nothing. One where the husband pays 75% and the woman pays 25%. And one that's more egalitarian and it's split 50-50. So again, did a Google search. I think apartments.com gave me this number, but the average mortgage in the United States right now is $2,250. Again, depending on where you live, what your interest rate was when you bought your home, it might be higher. There's obviously people with $4,000 and $5,000, $6,000 mortgages. But regardless, for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to use $2,250 as the number. And then I got a stat from, I think, This Old House, their blog, and it said that the average utility cost in the United States right now is $590. Again, it's going to vary based on your home, what you have, what services are accessible to you, how big it is, all that kind of stuff. But we'll go with those numbers for now. So the average, so based on these averages, the cost of living is higher than if you were to be a single girl boss renting an apartment somewhere. But because your husband is paying for it, if you're in a relationship with your husband's paying for it out of pocket, that $2,840 is the indirect financial equivalent and economic value of your household labor. So even though your husband isn't paying you $2,800 a month in cash, you are benefiting from housing and utilities that are equivalent to that. Now, when you divide it by 20 hours a week, 20 hours a month that goes into chores, the actual hourly value of your labor is closer to $142 an hour, which is crazy and wild because none of this right here, none of that is transactional, right? There's no W-2, There's no taxes. There's no withholding, right? So you get to benefit from $142 worth of value directly without Uncle Sam taking a penny. So obviously your husband is going to pay taxes, right? Because he's the one bringing home the money. And so his employer is going to deduct taxes. But you, as the housewife, or, you know, someone who's working from home, taking care of the home, that's your primary responsibility. You are benefiting from $142 per hour equivalent for your labor, for 20 hours of labor a week, and then, or for a month. And obviously, again, this will change if you have kids and that kind of thing. There's different calculations you can do, but this is a process you can adopt and template you can use for your own calculations. Okay, 75-25. Let's move on. So let's say the wife contributes something. She's not just 100% stay at home. Maybe she runs a business. I'm here. I do content creation. Maybe she has an Etsy shop. Maybe she works part time somewhere. Maybe she just has like a low paying job. Okay, so the economic value at 75% is almost $1,700 worth of the mortgage and about $440 worth of utilities. So she is benefiting from $2,131. Again, assuming the 20 hour a month chore time expenditure. This woman's making about $106.55 per hour. So significantly less than if the husband were paying 100%. But still far more than she'd probably be making in a full-time job. Now, let's go to an egalitarian or equal relationship where everything is split 50-50. The mortgage is going to cost the woman $1,125, and it's going to cost her $295 in utilities. So the overall cost split between husband and wife is $1,420. But again, doing the 20 hours worth of chores, the economic value she is benefiting from, even though she's still paying 50-50, she's benefiting from an economic value of $71 per hour. And I will say there's an economic value there because even if you're splitting 50-50, you get access to housing that the average girl boss doesn't get access to. And that's, because you have two incomes. You have someone, two different, if you get married and then buy a house, like you have assets and things like that, savings and all that kind of stuff. If you're a 25-year-old girl boss, you have nothing on your personal balance sheet except for student loan debt. So you're not going to have the opportunity to buy a house, especially if you're living in a city like New York City, where housing is through the roof. So even though this person is paying out of pocket 50-50 to contribute to the housing and is still doing chores, there is still an economic value to that because the woman isn't paying 100% of her own housing expenses like the girl boss, and she gets to benefit from better housing and presumably a house of her own versus living in an apartment because of that. Now, here's where things get real crazy, okay? So the average hour, or the average amount of time the 9-to-5 workers spend in the office is about 1,810 hours per year. Again, give or take, but that's about the average. So if you multiply $142 per hour, the amount of money that a woman whose husband is 100% responsible for their household's finances, if you multiply 142 by 1,810, that's about $257,000 worth of value. So if she were paid that equivalent working a full-time job, that's how much she would be making. Again, you can go through the line, do the same with the others. Well over six figures, okay? So if you normalize the value, the economic value of the hourly rate of doing chores on an 1,800 hour work year, you're clearing well over six figures. Again, you're not getting this out of pocket. No one's paying this to you. You're not actually working for that amount of time. I'm just saying that's what, if you look at housing and you look at utilities and the exchange you get when you do chores for housing and utilities, and then you normalize it on a standard work year, this is the economic value of that. So it's not unpaid labor like all the feminists like to say it is. There's a real economic value here. And women would be wise to capitalize on it. Now, to put all of this into context and to bring it back home, let's look at the average salary of a 25 to 44-year-old girl boss in New York City. So the average gross salary for someone living in New York City is about $92,000 a year. I got that off of, let me see, where is it here? Oh, this here, Housing Anywhere, and they pulled this from the Census Bureau. But this is 92 270 is the average annual salary by age. And of course, this is going to skew towards higher earning jobs because this is an average. I suspect the vast majority of women are in New York City are probably working support roles. So they're probably at like an ad agency. Maybe they're working in fashion. Maybe they're working in an editorial role, and they're probably making closer to like $50,000-$60,000 if they're lucky. But for the sake of this, we'll do 92,000. Okay. The thing with living in a city and working for the man outside the home is that you pay taxes to Uncle Sam. So unlike these women up here, okay, they're going to be paying taxes on any income they earn, yes, outside the home. But when they're doing chores within the home, that's not a real economic transaction according to Uncle Sam. So there's no taxes that are being collected when you do housework. So if you're making $142 per year, or for $142 per hour dollars per hour equivalent when you do chores, like Uncle Sam isn't assessing you taxes on that $142 per hour, right? That's 100% of the economic benefit and value and gain you benefit from on your own. But when you work for someone else, you pay taxes. So in New York City, if you make $92,000 a year, your take-home pay is actually $65,000 because you're paying taxes, you're paying federal, state, and city taxes, okay? Again, you can do the same calculation here, but instead of multiplying, you're going to divide by the 1,810 hour work year, and you get $36.15 per hour. So the average girl boss who is working outside the home, doing her own thing, is paying 100% of her cost of living out of pocket. So this is all out of pocket here. She's not benefiting anything from this because she's not sharing income with anyone, right? And then on top of that, because she's working outside the home, she's being taxed. And so her actual hourly rate is substantially less than a housewife. And what these women like this don't understand is that there's no freedom. There is no freedom when you have this. When you are beholden to an employer, there is no freedom. You have to show up to the office when they want you to. You have to work the hours they want you to work, and you have to do what they want you to do. Otherwise, you're not, that they can let you go. And, to give you an example, I got offered a remote writing job for a feminist publication that was going to pay $72,000 a year. So again, not, if I were living in New York City like that, not a large sum of money. At the time, I was tempted to take it because it would have been, stable income. Who doesn't want that? Benefits and all that kind of stuff. But the publication had full editorial control over my own personal writing. And I've been writing online personal essays and, things on economics and critiques of feminism, all that kind of stuff, for a couple of years now. And at the time I wasn't writing too many critiques on feminism, but since then I obviously have done more. But at the time, I was working more freelance, and I was okay with that because I value my ability to create and write my own stuff. And owning my own content library is super important to me, and far more important than whatever they were providing me. And it worked out because they got rid of the entire team I would have been on a couple months later. But I mean, that's the point, right? Is like, you don't have any freedom. And it's not even just, oh, you have to work, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, plus commuting and all that kind of stuff. It's your employer can determine what kinds of activities you can do outside of your job. So they can limit if you freelance, they can limit if you create content. They can monitor your social media. I had an employer that did that. So you really don't have any freedom. So yeah, there might not be any sort of like transactional exchange here when you're doing housework, but the economic value that you're benefiting from is far higher than anything you would earn in a 9-to-5. And because you're working from home, you're benefiting from the productivity gains of improvements in domestic technologies, and then you can use that time to do other things. And I think that's where the real value is. Okay, so yeah, The cost of the economic benefits provided by men who shoulder some, if not all, of the cost of living provided by housing and the expenses associated with it are left unacknowledged, and this is really important. The underlying assumption is that women are expected to trade their time for nothing in return, and this is what the entire feminist narrative says. It says women are burdened by domestic housework; they're not compensated; it's unpaid. Yet if a man is part of your life and he is contributing some, if not all, to the household, and you are not responsible for 100% of your household's expenses, you as a woman are benefiting, and you have to acknowledge that and appreciate that. To say, to get an entire rent or mortgage paid for and then demand your husband or your boyfriend or whoever to do 50-50% or 50-50 chores, and you're not also contributing 50-50 to that household, like, that's completely unfair to them. So I think we need to acknowledge that men do provide substantial value and that women have the opportunity to benefit from it if they wanted to. The fact that they continue to be oppressed by unpaid domestic labor is a choice at this point. Okay. And so, like I said, women who do not have to shoulder the costs of living alone benefit from the partnerships they're in, thanks to economies of scale. Standard expenses like housing and utilities are split between two economic participants rather than one. And of course, too, you're going to have to do any chores, regardless of whether or not you're in a relationship or you're married. Any chores you do for your household, you're going to do for yourself anyways, right? So if you don't want to do there's a woman, oh gosh, she's insufferable. I've commented about her before, but she's made TikToks about how she doesn't want to do her husband's laundry, right? It's his responsibility. Well, it doesn't matter, right? Because you have to do the laundry anyways, so why not just throw everything into the laundry all at once? It's economies of scale. If you live alone, you're going to have to do your dishes. If you live alone, you're going to have to cook. If you live alone, you're going to have to, do all sorts of different chores. Sure, the cadence at which you do those chores is going to change, right? So if you live alone, maybe you only change your bed sheets every 2 weeks instead of every, 3 or 4 days, right? Maybe if you live alone, you don't have pets, so you don't have to clean up, any messes they make. Maybe if you live alone, you get takeout more, or you eat, larger, you make batches of food and you eat in smaller portions, so you have less dishes to do. Okay, so the frequency at which you do chores might change, sure, but you're still gonna have to do those chores. So why not do the chores in relationship with someone else and have like the emotional value of a relationship, be in a healthy marriage, have someone to like do life with, and then split the costs, and that includes chores and finances, all that kind of stuff. Like, it makes so much sense to me, and it baffles me that feminist women don't like look at the actual economics of this and understand how much they're actually benefiting from all of this. It's just completely unacknowledged. Okay, so because of the productivity gains in domestic work, women have to contribute significantly less time than they used to in order to maintain a home. The time savings can be spent working a traditional 9-to-5 job, as it is for most dual income households. Well, this is the default option for many Americans, and I'm going to be honest, it's essential for some, for most. It isn't the only option. So you might need to have a dual income home. You might need two people bringing in money. But working a 9-to-5 job for corporate America isn't the only way to make money. Okay? It might be the easiest, the lowest barrier to entry, the most reliable, at least for the time being, but it isn't the only way to make money. If women were more open to taking on domestic responsibilities, they could have the economic freedom they seek. Thanks to the internet, it's now possible to run a profitable business from the comfort of your own home while raising your children. You can still make money and contribute to the household budget, all while providing yourself with a financial safety net too. So I know this is always a big concern for a lot of feminist women. It's like, oh, I don't want to rely on a man. What if something happens and then I'm on my own? Okay, we live in the 21st century. You have the internet. You have all sorts of payment processors and websites that are just plug and play. You can create a myriad of different products, sell them, market them. You can sell your skills, you can freelance. There are all sorts of things you can do with an internet connection and a couple of monthly subscriptions. It's never been easier to make money. You can do it. It's super easy. My fiance and my best friend are encouraging me to start a cookie a cookie side hustle, and I think I'll do it. But my best friend always sells me, or she sends me screenshots from her a group she's in, a mom group she's in back home on Facebook. And there's another mom in that group who does the same thing. She makes cookies out of her own home. She sells them from her home. People place orders. She gets payment via Venmo, and then people come and pick them up. And it's like anyone can do that, right? Like, no, you're not going to make six figures doing that. Of course not. But if you want to make some extra money or you want to contribute, you can do that. I've been freelancing for a while. I do content online. Like, there are so many different ways to make money. When I traveled the country back in 2021, I was living in my car and traveling, and I flipped books. I went to thrift stores. I bought books, and then I sent them into Amazon, and I sold them on Amazon for a profit. And I've been, selling on eBay since I was 12 years old. There's some things I've sold on eBay where it just like blows my mind. I've gone to yard sales and bought mid-century, 1960s, 70s era plastic, plateware. I remember this very vividly. There's a woman that had a yard sale and she had a bunch of vintage stuff, so I bought it and, sold it for $200, $300 per set to hipsters in Brooklyn. Like, it's so easy. You just have to do the work and do it. But what I think feminists don't realize is that there is more freedom in doing unpaid housework and managing your home, raising your children, taking ownership over the domestic, and making professional secondary. I think there is so much value to that, and there's so much to gain because of efficiency gains, not just in domestic productivity, but also in technology. And so women can do all sorts of different stuff. You can leverage your education, you can leverage your experience in your career. And like I said, you can do a cookie side hustle, flip stuff online, do consulting work. There's all sorts of different stuff you can do. So you're not just getting rid of your career, you're not just losing it, you're just not working for a corporate employer for 40 plus hours a week anymore. And so I think there's a lot of value in that, and women would be wise to wake up to the options they have. And if they still choose to work a 9 to 5 job, great. They can go do that. But that doesn't mean that they have the right to denigrate the rest of us who have chosen alternative options for ourselves, who have designed different lives for ourselves, and who prioritize and value different things than climbing a career ladder. So yeah, that's what I have for you today. I really think this is interesting to think about. And of course, the math here isn't perfect. It's using averages, and it won't apply evenly to everyone. But I think if you haven't done this calculation for yourself, I would definitely do it. And, just compare the costs and benefits and look at the non-financial, non-economic, non-transactional gains you have by being in a marriage with someone else where you're not shouldering 100% of the responsibility of your own livelihood on your own. Like, compare that to what it is like to live on your own, and I think you'll see there's a lot more value in a marriage and in relationships. And then of course you have the benefits of, the emotional and the spiritual side of things too, where you're doing life with someone else and you're not all alone. So I think there's a lot more value in doing chores than women would like to acknowledge. And of course, like, there's, it's kind of fun. Like I said, I've said before, I love cooking, so that's not really a chore for me. There are some things I don't particularly like doing, but at the end of the day, they need to get done and I'll do them. And I love moving, and, like I said, I'm a marathon runner, so fitness is important. So yeah, doing chores is good because it's non-exercise activity that you're doing throughout the day, which boosts your metabolism. So why wouldn't anyone want to do chores? There's so many benefits to it. And I think we need to reframe it as such, that it's not this oppressive thing that women are forced to do and they're not compensated for it. There's just non-financial, non-transactional benefits of it that they just haven't accounted for. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you agree, disagree, if you would look at this differently and how you might look at it. And if you found value in this and you think there's a feminist in your life who could benefit from seeing this breakdown and this calculation, I would love it if you would send this video to them. I would be curious to hear their thoughts as well. And if you like this video, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.